Most people believe money changes your life. When you become rich, 6 figures, 7 figures, financial freedom, that's the mythology. But the real structural shift doesn't happen there. It happens at $50,000, not income, capital. Because at that exact point, the financial system quietly stops treating you like a consumer and starts allowing you to behave like a participant. Most people never notice this threshold. They spend their entire lives operating below it, assuming the problem is motivation, discipline, intelligence, or work ethic. But the truth is much more unsettling. The financial world operates like physics. There are invisible thresholds where the rules change. Below those thresholds, energy dissipates. Above them, systems begin to amplify force. Money works exactly the same way. Below $50,000, every dollar you earn is forced into survival gravity. Rent, bills, unexpected expenses, short-term thinking, constant resets. It feels like progress is possible. But every time you move forward, something pulls you back. A car repair, a medical bill, a broken appliance, a sudden emergency that erases months of effort. In a single week. This isn't bad luck. This is structural friction. The system is designed in a way where small amounts of capital cannot generate enough force to escape consumption gravity. And that's why most people remain stuck in the same financial orbit for decades. Working harder doesn't fix it. Budgeting doesn't fix it. Even earning more often doesn't fix it. Because until a certain capital mass is reached, money behaves like sand, slipping through your fingers. But once you cross roughly $50,000 in liquid capital, something subtle begins to happen. Your relationship with risk changes. Your decision-making changes. Your opportunities change. More importantly, your time horizon changes. Suddenly, you're no longer making every decision based on the next 30 days. You can start thinking in years. And that single shift begins to alter the mathematics of your life. But here is the uncomfortable reality. Most people who reach $50,000 don't experience this transformation. They hit the threshold and then unknowingly destroy it. A slightly better apartment, a more impressive car, more lifestyle pressure, more subtle expectations from friends, family, and social comparison. The system quietly pulls the capital back into consumption, and the threshold disappears again. This is the trap. The world celebrates income, but the real game is capital positioning, because $50,000 is not just money. It is a strategic pivot point, a place where money can begin to behave like a tool instead of a temporary resource. But only if you understand the architecture behind it. Because there is an invisible financial structure operating beneath the surface of everyday life. A structure that determines why some people accelerate rapidly, why others remain trapped, despite intelligence and effort, and why a relatively small amount of capital can completely change the trajectory of the next 20 years. Once you see this structure, something unsettling becomes clear. The majority of financial advice is aimed at people who are already inside the system, not the people trying to enter it. And that is why millions of intelligent, white hardworking individuals feel like they are doing everything right, yet nothing fundamentally changes. But to understand why $50,000 is the true turning point, you first have to understand something far more important: the invisible financial architecture. Most people are unknowingly living inside, and once you see it, you will realize something that changes how you think about money forever. Because the real problem was never your discipline. It was the structure you were operating within. And that structure begins revealing itself the moment we look at how money actually moves through the lives of ordinary people. But the deeper you examine it, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. Because the system was never designed to help you cross that first capital threshold. In fact, it quietly depends on you never reaching it. There is a quiet assumption embedded in modern financial culture. If you're struggling financially, the explanation must be personal. You spent too much. You failed to budget. You lacked discipline. You made poor decisions. The narrative is simple. And because it is simple, it is powerful. But it is also incomplete. Because beneath the surface of everyday life, there exists a financial architecture, so deeply embedded in society that most people never recognize it. Not because it is hidden, but because it is normal. This structure determines how money flows through your life, how quickly it escapes, and how difficult it becomes to accumulate real capital. And the most important feature of this architecture is something economists rarely explain clearly. Money behaves very differently, depending on how much of it you already possess. This is the first shift. Below certain thresholds, money is fragile. Above those thresholds, money becomes durable. To understand why $50,000 matters so much, we have to examine how financial gravity works in the real world. Imagine your financial life as a container. Every paycheck enters that container. Every expense drains it. But the container itself has a structural flaw. Small containers leak, not metaphorically, mathematically. Because the smaller your capital base, the more sensitive your life becomes to disruption. A $600 emergency for someone with $2,000 in savings is catastrophic. Set the same $600. For someone with $60,000 barely registers. The event is identical. The consequences are completely different. This is the first hidden law of financial architecture. The smaller your capital base, the more violently reality affects you. And this has a psychological side effect. Most people never realize, when money is scarce, your brain shifts into short-term survival mode. Decisions compress. Time horizons collapse. You stop thinking about leverage, strategy, or opportunity. You begin thinking about the next bill, the next paycheck, the next potential problem. This is not weakness. It is biology. Human cognition under financial stress becomes reactive instead of strategic. Which means people below certain capital levels are not simply dealing with financial limitations. They are dealing with cognitive compression. Their ability to think long-term is physically reduced. This is why advice, like just invest consistently, often fails for the majority of people, because consistent investing requires stability, and stability requires buffer capital. Without that buffer, every financial plan eventually collides with reality. A sudden expense, a temporary job disruption, an unexpected responsibility. And each time this happens, progress resets. Savings disappear. Investments get liquidated. Momentum collapses. The cycle begins again. Though this is why many people feel like they are running on a treadmill financially. Years of effort, little permanent change. But the architecture reveals something crucial. This treadmill effect is strongest when capital remains below a specific level. Because below that level, every dollar must constantly defend against life itself. This is why $50,000 represents a structural turning point, not because it is a massive fortune, but because it begins to create financial insulation, and insulation changes behavior. Once you reach a certain level of liquid capital, something subtle happens. Emergencies stop being destructive. They become manageable events. Unexpected expenses no longer erase progress. They become temporary disturbances. That shift alone changes the trajectory of wealth accumulation. But the system contains another mechanism most people overlook, one that silently keeps millions trapped below that threshold. So because the modern economy is not just a place where people earn money, it is a consumption engine. Every advertisement, every social comparison, every upgrade culture signal is designed to pull your capital back into the system. And the closer you get to building a meaningful capital base, the stronger those signals become. A slightly better apartment, a more expensive phone, a nicer car. More subtle lifestyle upgrades that appear harmless. Individually, but together, they create a powerful siphon. Because consumption is not random. It is psychologically engineered. And the system quietly encourages you to increase your lifestyle. Exactly when your income increases. This is where the architecture reveals its true intention. You're allowed to earn more, but you're strongly encouraged to spend more at the exact same rate, which means the most important milestone. In personal finance, your first real capital threshold often disappears just as quickly as it appears. This is why millions of people with strong incomes still feel financially fragile. They never crossed the insulation barrier. Their income increased, but their capital base never stabilized. And without that base, the laws of financial gravity remain unchanged. Every setback resets progress. Every emergency destroys momentum. And every attempt to move forward is quietly absorbed by the structure. This is where the architecture becomes deeply uncomfortable to examine. Because once you see it, something becomes obvious. The system does not reward effort first. It rewards position. And position begins with capital, even modest capital, especially that first $50,000. But to understand why this threshold changes everything, we need to examine something even more dangerous. Not the financial system itself, but the psychological traps it installs inside your behavior. Because long before people lose their money, they unknowingly sabotage the conditions required to build it. And the most dangerous part is that these behaviors feel completely normal, even intelligent, even responsible. Which is exactly why they are so difficult to detect. This is where the real trap begins to reveal itself. And once you understand it, you will start noticing the pattern everywhere. But the next layer of this system is far more psychological than financial, and far more powerful than most people realize. Once you begin to see the architecture, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Most people believe financial progress is primarily about income. Earn more money. Your life improves. On the surface, this appears logical. But when economists examine real financial mobility data across decades, something strange appears. Yet large increases in income rarely produce lasting wealth on their own. People move from $40,000 to $70,000, from $70,000 to $120,000, from $120,000 to $200,000. Yet many of them remain financially fragile. The reason is subtle but critical. Income changes speed. Capital changes position. And position is what determines whether the system works with you or against you. Below meaningful capital levels, money behaves like water flowing through pipes. It enters quickly and leaves just as quickly. The pipes are your obligations: housing, transportation, insurance, food, social expectations, daily living infrastructure. Each of these pipes has been quietly expanding over time. Housing costs grow. Transportation expectations rise. Social standards escalate. And slowly, invisibly, the cost of maintaining an ordinary life expands to absorb almost any increase in income. This is not an accident. It is the natural outcome of a consumption-driven economic system. When people earn more, industries evolve to capture the difference. Better homes, more advanced devices, more services, more conveniences. Each upgrade appears individually rational, but collectively, they perform a hidden function. They prevent capital accumulation, and capital accumulation is the one thing the average financial structure struggles to produce. This is why the first $50,000 matters so much, because it represents the moment where money stops being entirely consumed by the system. For the first time, money begins to remain in place. And once money remains in place, it begins to behave differently. It begins to create optionality. Optionality is one of the most misunderstood forces in financial strategy. Most people think wealth is about buying things. In reality, wealth is about reducing forced decisions. When you have no capital buffer, every decision becomes urgent. Every opportunity becomes risky. Every unexpected event becomes destabilizing. You cannot take intelligent risks. You can only avoid dangerous ones. But once capital begins to accumulate, your relationship with time changes. Suddenly, you can wait. You can observe. You can choose opportunities instead of reacting to emergencies. This is the moment when strategy becomes possible, and strategy is what transforms money from a temporary resource into a self-reinforcing system. But here is where the architecture becomes even more deceptive. Because reaching $50,000 in capital is not only difficult due to external pressures, it is difficult because of something happening internally. A psychological phenomenon that appears exactly at the moment. People begin accumulating meaningful savings. The moment the system starts loosening its grip, people begin to feel something strange. Financial discomfort, not stress. The opposite, a subtle, yet unfamiliar feeling of having money sitting still. For someone who has spent years watching every dollar move, immediately toward bills, obligations, or purchases, large idle savings can feel unnatural, almost wrong. Money sitting in an account begins to create psychological tension. The brain starts searching for ways to resolve that tension, and resolution usually arrives. Disguised as something reasonable, a necessary upgrade, a well-deserved improvement, a smarter lifestyle choice, a small reward for years of effort. Individually, each decision feels justified, but collectively, they perform a predictable function. They destroy the threshold. The $50,000 buffer disappears, and with it, the structural advantages that were about to begin. This cycle happens more often than people realize. Someone saves aggressively. For years, they reach $20,000, then $30,000, then $40,000. They feel proud, relieved. Finally, stable. And then, a few seemingly harmless decisions. Begin. A slightly nicer living arrangement, a better car, more flexible spending. Within months or years, the capital reserve slowly dissolves, and the person returns to the exact same financial structure they were trying to escape. This is not irresponsibility. It is the result of a powerful behavioral pattern embedded in human psychology. Humans are naturally wired to convert stored resources into immediate comfort. This instinct was valuable thousands of years ago. In modern financial systems, it becomes destructive. Because the moment capital accumulates, the temptation to convert it into visible lifestyle improvements becomes extremely powerful. This is where the architecture of modern finance intersects with human behavior, and the result is a trap that captures millions of people. They believe they are progressing because their income rises, but the system continuously redirects their resources into consumption before meaningful capital can accumulate, which means the most important turning point. In personal finance, your first true capital base is constantly postponed. But here is where the deeper structure begins to reveal itself. Because once someone finally manages to protect that first $50,000, something unexpected happens. Their decision-making changes. Their stress levels change. Their relationship with risk changes. And slowly, almost quietly, the financial system begins responding to them differently. Opportunities that once seemed dangerous begin to look strategic. Time begins to feel less compressed. And for the first time, money begins to behave like a force multiplier instead of a survival tool. But to fully understand why this threshold changes everything, we need to examine the next layer of the system, not the structure, not the psychology. One of the behavioral finance traps that keep intelligent people circling the same financial orbit for decades. Because the system does not only shape your environment, it shapes your behavior. And those behaviors determine whether $50,000 becomes a launchpad or another temporary checkpoint that disappears just as quickly as it arrived. And the most dangerous traps are the ones that look like success. There is a moment that happens quietly in many people's financial lives. Income rises, and savings begin to grow. Stress starts to decrease. For the first time in years, the future feels slightly more stable. And then something strange begins to happen. The very progress someone worked so hard to create begins to reshape their behavior, not in dramatic ways, in subtle ones. Because money does something powerful to the human mind, it changes identity. And identity changes behavior far more than logic ever will. This is why behavioral economists have spent decades studying a simple but disturbing observation. People rarely manage money based on mathematics. They manage money based on self-perception. And the moment someone starts earning or saving more than they previously did, a silent psychological shift begins. Their internal identity starts updating. I'm doing well now. I've worked hard for this. I deserve some comfort. None of these thoughts are irrational, but they begin triggering one of the most dangerous forces in personal finance: status signaling. Humans evolved in social groups where status determined survival. Higher status meant greater security, influence, and access to resources. That instinct never disappeared. It simply adapted to modern society. Today, status is often communicated through consumption: homes, cars, devices, experiences, even subtle lifestyle choices that signal belonging to a particular social tier. But here is where the behavioral trap begins. Once someone's income rises, their reference group changes. A person earning $40,000 compares themselves to one group. A person earning $100,000 compares themselves to an entirely different one. And those comparisons quietly reshape spending patterns, not consciously, automatically. You move to a slightly better neighborhood. Your friends begin recommending nicer restaurants. The expectations around travel change. Even the standard for what feels normal begins to rise. This phenomenon is known in behavioral economics as hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most powerful forces preventing capital accumulation. Because the moment income increases, the brain quickly adjusts to a new baseline of comfort. What once felt luxurious becomes ordinary. What once felt optional begins to feel necessary. And slowly, almost invisibly, spending expands to absorb the increase. This is why income growth alone rarely produces financial freedom. Lifestyle expands alongside it, which means the system quietly captures the surplus before it becomes capital. But the trap runs even deeper than consumption. Because status signaling is not just about comfort. It is about identity preservation. Humans want their external lives to reflect how they see themselves internally. If someone begins to view themselves as successful, they feel pressure, often subconscious, to display signals of that success. A better car becomes more than transportation. It becomes confirmation of progress. A nicer apartment becomes more than housing. It becomes evidence of upward mobility. These signals are not purely about impressing others. They are also about reassuring ourselves, but each signal comes with a hidden cost. Not just financially, strategically, because every dollar redirected into visible consumption is a dollar not reinforcing your capital base. And capital base is what determines whether you escape financial gravity. This is why the $50,000 threshold is so fragile. It sits precisely at the intersection of two powerful forces: rising income, rising lifestyle expectations. Many people reach this level of savings once in their lives. But behavioral pressure begins pulling them back immediately. And often, they do not realize it is happening. Because the decisions feel rational. A better car seems responsible. A nicer home seems logical. An upgraded lifestyle feels deserved. Each decision individually appears harmless. But together they begin dissolving the financial insulation that was forming. And once that insulation disappears, the system returns to its default state. Income flows in. Expenses absorb it. Capital struggles to accumulate. The treadmill continues. This is why behavioral finance researchers often say something deeply uncomfortable. The greatest threat to financial stability is not low income. It is uncontrolled lifestyle expansion. Because when spending grows alongside income, the structural position never changes. You remain dependent on your next paycheck. You remain exposed to every financial shock. You remain unable to think strategically, which means the entire system continues controlling your decisions. But the behavioral traps do not stop there, because status signaling and lifestyle inflation are only the surface. Beneath them lies something even more powerful, something that quietly shapes how people make financial decisions long before money ever enters the equation. A deeper psychological mechanism, one that causes intelligent, hard-working individuals to unknowingly sabotage their financial trajectory, even when they are doing almost everything right. And once you see it, you will start recognizing it everywhere, not just in others, but in your own decisions. Because the next trap isn't about money at all, it's about identity. And identity is far more powerful than mathematics. Long before money begins influencing your decisions, something else is already shaping them: your financial identity. This identity forms, slowly, often without your awareness. It begins in childhood. You observe how adults around you talk about money. You notice their stress, their habits, their limitations. You hear phrases repeated over and over. Money doesn't grow on trees. People like us don't take big risks. You have to work hard for every dollar. Rich people are different. These ideas do not arrive as lessons. They arrive as background noise. But over time, that noise becomes programming. And programming becomes identity. By the time someone reaches adulthood, they are not just making financial decisions. They are acting out a financial role they unconsciously accepted years earlier. Some people adopt the identity of the provider. They feel responsible for supporting others, often at the expense of building their own capital. Others adopt the identity of the enjoyer. They prioritize experiences, comfort, and living fully in the present. Some become the saver, obsessively protecting money but rarely deploying it strategically. Others unconsciously adopt the identity of the struggler, expecting financial difficulty as a permanent condition. Each of these identities carries behavioral patterns that feel natural, even when they quietly sabotage long-term outcomes. And here is the dangerous part. Financial identity rarely evolves automatically. When income increases, someone can move from $30,000 to $120,000 per year and still behave exactly like the person they were when they earned $30,000. Their decisions remain emotionally anchored to the same identity, which means new income simply flows into the same behavioral patterns. A provider continues overextending themselves. An enjoyer expands their lifestyle. A saver hoards cash but avoids intelligent risk. A struggler unconsciously recreates financial instability. This is why behavioral economists often observe something surprising. People do not simply earn money. They subconsciously try to remain consistent with their self-image. If someone's identity does not include the concept of managing significant capital, they will unknowingly make decisions that reduce their capital back to a familiar level. This phenomenon is sometimes described as a financial thermostat. Just like a thermostat regulates temperature, your internal beliefs regulate the amount of wealth you feel comfortable holding. When wealth rises above that level, behaviors begin adjusting to bring it back down. A risky purchase, a poorly timed investment, an unnecessary lifestyle upgrade, a sudden burst of generosity. Each action feels justified. But collectively, they move the financial thermostat back to its familiar setting. This is why the $50,000 threshold becomes psychologically volatile. For many people, it represents the first time they have ever held meaningful capital. And that unfamiliar state creates tension, because their identity may still be calibrated for scarcity. Is that the mind begins searching for ways to restore familiarity, sometimes through spending, sometimes through overly conservative behavior, sometimes through subtle self-sabotage disguised as rational decisions. This is why intelligence alone rarely produces financial stability. Brilliant individuals often struggle financially because their identity remains tied to an earlier stage of life. Their habits belong to someone who never expected to manage capital, which means when capital finally appears, they do not know how to behave around it. But identity-based traps are only one layer of the behavioral system. There is another mechanism working quietly alongside them. A mechanism driven by modern society itself. Social comparison. Humans evolved in small groups. Your reference point for success used to be a few dozen people around you. Now your reference point includes millions. Through social media, entertainment, and digital culture, people are constantly exposed to lifestyles far beyond their own. Luxury homes, exotic travel, entrepreneurial success stories, financial milestones. Presented as normal achievements, this exposure changes perception. Suddenly, being financially stable no longer feels impressive. It feels average. Someone with $50,000 in savings may begin comparing themselves to people claiming seven-figure success, and comparison creates pressure. Pressure to accelerate, pressure to upgrade, one pressure to appear successful, even if the underlying capital structure is fragile, which leads to one of the most dangerous behavioral traps in modern finance: performative success. People begin making financial decisions based on how those decisions will be perceived by others. Instead of building invisible capital, they build visible lifestyle signals. A better car, a luxury apartment, frequent travel, premium experiences, all financed by income that could have been building structural capital. And here is the paradox. From the outside, this lifestyle often looks like financial progress, but internally, nothing has changed. The person is still dependent on their next paycheck, still vulnerable to financial shocks, still unable to think in long-term strategic cycles. The system has successfully redirected their momentum back into consumption. This is the behavioral architecture that prevents millions of intelligent people from ever crossing their first true capital threshold. Not because they lack ability, but because the system shapes their behavior, long before they understand the rules of the game. And until someone recognizes these patterns, they will continue repeating them. Income rises, lifestyle rises, capital remains stagnant. The cycle repeats. But once someone manages to protect that first $50,000 and resist the behavioral traps surrounding it, they gain access to something far more powerful than income. They gain access to mathematics. Because at that point, money begins interacting with one of the most powerful forces in the financial universe: compounding. And once compounding begins, operating on a meaningful capital base, the trajectory of a financial life can change in ways that most people never expect. But the mathematics behind this shift reveal something even more surprising, because the difference between $5,000, $50,000, and $500,000 is not just scale, it is velocity. And velocity is what determines whether wealth grows slowly or begins accelerating beyond ordinary expectations. Money is often discussed emotionally: security, freedom, comfort, status. But beneath all of those narratives, money operates according to something much colder: mathematics. And the mathematics of wealth reveal a principle that most people never fully understand. Wealth does not grow linearly. It grows non-linearly. This means the first stage of wealth creation is painfully slow. But after a certain threshold, growth begins to accelerate in ways that appear almost unfair to outside observers. This acceleration is not magic. It is the result of two interacting forces: capital mass and compounding velocity. Yet to understand why $50,000 represents such a crucial threshold, we need to look at how compounding behaves at different levels of capital. Imagine three individuals starting from different financial positions. Person A has $5,000. Person B has $50,000. Person C has $500,000. All three invest their money with the same return rate of 8% annually. On paper, the growth rate is identical. But the real-world consequences are dramatically different. After 1 year, $5,000. becomes $5,400, $50,000 becomes $54,000, $500,000 becomes $540,000. The percentage gain is equal. But the impact is not. The first person gained $400, the second gained $4,000, the third gained $40,000. Already, the system begins revealing its asymmetry. The more capital you possess, the more powerful. Each percentage point becomes, but this is only the first layer. Because compounding is not just about annual growth, it is about time interacting with capital. If the same individuals leave their money invested for 10 years, at the same rate, something more dramatic appears. $5,000 becomes roughly $10,800, $50,000 becomes about $108,000, $500,000 becomes approximately $1,080,000. Notice something important. At the smallest level, the difference between the starting point and the outcome is modest. At the middle level, the growth becomes meaningful. At the highest level, the system begins generating life-changing outcomes. Works, and yet the mechanism is identical. The only difference is starting capital. This is why the first capital threshold matters so much. Not because $50,000 produces instant wealth, but because it marks the moment when the mathematics of money begin to produce visible momentum. Below this level, growth feels almost invisible. At $5,000, an 8% return produces only $400. That amount is easily erased by everyday life: a car repair, a medical bill, a temporary disruption, which means compounding never has the chance to build momentum. The system resets repeatedly, but at $50,000, the dynamics begin shifting. An 8% return produces $4,000 annually. That amount is large enough to begin reinforcing the capital base, rather than being immediately erased by routine life events. This is the beginning of capital reinforcement. And once reinforcement begins, the system starts behaving differently. Money no longer simply grows. It assists its own growth. Because the more capital you accumulate, the larger the returns become. And the larger the returns become, the easier it becomes to accumulate even more capital. This creates a feedback loop. But the real acceleration begins when something else enters the equation: additional contributions. Imagine someone who has reached the $50,000 threshold and continues adding $1,000 per month into their investments. At first, the contributions dominate the growth. But over time, the compounding returns begin catching up. After 10 years, something surprising happens. The investment returns start generating almost as much growth as the monthly contributions themselves. After 15 years, the returns may exceed the contributions. At that point, wealth begins growing, with increasing independence from labor. This is the moment many people describe as the beginning of financial momentum. But here is the uncomfortable reality. Most people never reach this stage, yet not because the mathematics are difficult, but because reaching the first capital threshold requires surviving the slowest phase of wealth creation. The phase where progress feels invisible. The phase where small disruptions erase months of effort. The phase where behavioral traps pull capital back into consumption. This is why the early stages of wealth building feel frustrating. Effort is high. Visible results are low. And, without understanding the underlying mathematics, many people assume the strategy itself is flawed, so they abandon it. but the system is simply waiting for enough capital mass to begin accelerating. And that acceleration typically begins somewhere around the $50,000 range, not because the number itself is magical, but because it creates enough mass for compounding to start producing noticeable reinforcement. This is where the structure begins to change. But there is another mathematical principle hidden inside this transition, one that explains why some people accelerate dramatically after reaching modest capital levels, while others remain stuck for decades. Despite having decent savings, and it has nothing to do with investment returns, it has everything to do with velocity. Because money does not simply grow, it moves. And how money moves through your life determines whether it multiplies or quietly disappears back into the system. Most people think wealth is determined by how much money you earn. A smaller group believes wealth is determined by how much money you save. But when economists study long-term wealth formation, they often discover something far more revealing. Wealth is largely determined by how money moves through your system. This movement is called capital velocity, and it explains why two people with the same income, the same investment returns, and even the same starting savings can end up in completely different financial positions 20 years later, because money does not simply sit still. It follows pathways. These pathways determine whether money multiplies or vanishes. To understand this, imagine two individuals who both reach the $50,000 threshold. Both invest their money and both continue earning similar incomes. On paper, their trajectories appear identical. But the way they handle financial flow begins diverging almost immediately. The first person allows money to cycle back into consumption. Small upgrades appear harmless. A slightly larger home, a more expensive vehicle, more frequent discretionary spending. None of these decisions seem catastrophic. Yet each one quietly increases the outflow velocity of their money. Their income increases. Their spending expands alongside it, which means their capital base grows slowly, if at all. The second person behaves differently. They protect the $50,000 threshold like structural infrastructure. Instead of allowing new income to expand lifestyle immediately, they redirect a portion of it toward reinforcing the capital base. Each month, small additions strengthen the core. $500, $1,000, $1,500. Individually, these amounts appear modest. But something powerful begins happening beneath the surface. The capital base expands, which increases compounding returns, which produces additional capital, which then compounds again. This creates what financial theorists call positive velocity, like money begins flowing into assets faster than it flows out through consumption. At first, the difference between the two individuals appears small. Maybe one person's capital grows to $70,000 while the other reaches $90,000. Nothing dramatic. But velocity compounds just like capital does. After 5 years, the difference becomes clearer. After 10 years, the divergence can become dramatic. One person may still be hovering around $80,000 or $90,000. The other may have crossed $200,000, not because they earned dramatically more, but because the flow of their money reinforced itself instead of dissolving. This is the hidden mathematics behind wealth acceleration. Income matters. But capital velocity matters far more, and capital velocity only begins operating effectively once someone has built a stable base, which is why $50,000 becomes such an important inflection point. It is the level where money begins having enough mass to participate in velocity systems. But velocity alone does not create explosive growth. There is another factor: time. When capital velocity operates for extended periods, something extraordinary begins to happen. Returns start producing additional returns large enough to noticeably affect the capital base. Imagine someone who begins with $50,000 and contributes $1,000 per month, while earning an average 8% annual return. After 10 years, the account may exceed $230,000. After 20 years, it could approach $700,000. After 30 years, it may exceed $1.5 million. The contributions remain constant. The return rate remains constant. But the time interacting with velocity transforms modest beginnings into extraordinary outcomes. This is why financial acceleration often appears sudden from the outside. Someone seems stable for many years. Then, within a decade, their wealth multiplies rapidly. Observers assume luck, or superior investments, or special knowledge. But in many cases, the true cause is far simpler. They protected the early capital threshold long enough for velocity and time to begin interacting. And once those forces align, the system begins generating momentum. However, this is where another uncomfortable reality appears. The mathematics of compounding are extremely powerful, but they are also extremely fragile. Because every interruption resets the velocity. Every time capital is withdrawn for consumption, the compounding system loses momentum. If someone removes $20,000 from a $70,000 investment portfolio to finance lifestyle upgrades, the damage is not limited to the $20,000 itself. It also eliminates decades of potential compounding that money would have generated. This is why early withdrawals are so destructive to long-term wealth formation. They interrupt the velocity system before it has time to mature. And because the early years of compounding are the slowest, people often underestimate the long-term consequences. Yet the loss feels temporary. But mathematically, the impact can extend across decades. This is why protecting the first $50,000 is not simply about discipline. It is about protecting the foundation of a velocity system. Without that foundation, compounding remains theoretical. With it, the mathematics begin, operating quietly in the background. But here is where the story becomes more complex. Because even when people understand the mathematics of wealth, even when they reach the $50,000 threshold, even when they begin building positive capital velocity, many still fail. Not because the system stopped working, but because another force begins interfering. A force that has nothing to do with money or mathematics. A force driven by environment, social pressure, and the quiet expectations embedded in everyday life. And this force has the power to destroy financial momentum faster than almost anything else, because it operates through something deeply human, the need to belong. And that need shapes financial behavior in ways most people never recognize. There is a belief many people quietly hold about wealth, that people who build substantial financial stability must possess some rare advantage: superior intelligence, exceptional discipline, unique knowledge about investing. But when economists examine long-term financial outcomes across large populations, something surprising emerges. Intelligence alone explains very little. Highly educated professionals often struggle financially. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, corporate executives, individuals capable of solving complex problems every day. yet many of them still remain financially fragile. The explanation is not mathematics. It is environmental pressure. Because the moment someone begins improving their financial position, a powerful social force begins shaping their behavior. The pressure to normalize success. Humans evolved to survive within groups. Belonging meant protection. Exclusion meant danger. That evolutionary instinct never disappeared. Even in modern society, the human brain remains deeply sensitive to social alignment. We naturally adjust our behavior to match the expectations of the people around us. This happens with language, with clothing, with habits, and especially with spending. If everyone in your social environment lives in modest apartments, driving modest cars, modest spending becomes normal. But if your environment shifts toward higher earners, the baseline of what feels normal begins changing immediately. A nicer home no longer feels extravagant. It feels appropriate. A more expensive vehicle no longer feels indulgent. It feels responsible. Even leisure activities change. Travel, dining, experiences all begin scaling upward with the surrounding environment. This process happens gradually, almost invisibly, but it carries a powerful financial consequence. Because the moment someone enters a higher income environment, their lifestyle baseline begins drifting upward. And lifestyle baselines are extremely difficult to reverse. Once someone becomes accustomed to a particular standard of living, returning to a lower one feels like loss, even if that lower level would create long-term financial stability. This is where intelligent people often encounter their most dangerous trap. They believe their rising income will eventually create wealth. But their environment quietly expands their expenses at the same pace, which means the structural position never changes. A person earning $80,000 may feel financially constrained, but so might someone earning $200,000 if their environment has normalized a $190,000 lifestyle. Income increased, but the system absorbed the difference. This phenomenon is known as lifestyle inflation, and it is one of the most powerful forces preventing capital accumulation. Not because people are irresponsible, but because lifestyle inflation rarely feels excessive in the moment. Each step upward appears justified. A larger home may seem logical if your career is progressing. A better car may appear necessary if colleagues and peers are driving similar vehicles. Upgraded experiences may feel like a reward for years of hard work. Individually, these decisions feel rational. Collectively, they can destroy the capital velocity system we discussed earlier, because every dollar redirected into permanent lifestyle expenses becomes a fixed financial obligation. And fixed obligations change the psychology of decision-making. When monthly expenses rise, financial risk tolerance decreases. People become more cautious, more dependent on stable income, less willing to pursue opportunities that involve uncertainty, which means their financial system becomes increasingly rigid. High income may continue flowing, but the flexibility required for wealth building disappears. This is why many high earners feel trapped. They appear successful from the outside, but internally, said their financial system requires continuous income just to maintain stability. The moment income stops, the entire structure becomes vulnerable, which means their lifestyle is not a sign of wealth. It is a sign of financial dependency, and dependency creates stress. A stress that many people quietly carry for years. Because the more someone upgrades their lifestyle, the harder it becomes to slow down. their financial obligations begin controlling their career decisions, or their risk tolerance, even their personal freedom. And this is where the trap reveals itself fully. The modern economy rewards to visible success, but visible success often requires financial commitments that prevent real wealth from forming. So people unintentionally build lives that look prosperous but remain structurally fragile. This is why many financially intelligent individuals remain stuck. They mastered earning, but they never mastered structural positioning. Without structural positioning, income alone cannot create financial freedom. But the environmental pressure does not stop at lifestyle inflation. There is another force operating beneath it, a force that quietly drains cognitive energy. Decision fatigue. Because every financial commitment someone makes creates a new stream of decisions. They must manage continuously. And over time, those decisions begin affecting behavior in ways most people never expect. That the human brain is not designed to make an unlimited number of high-quality decisions every day. Cognitive scientists have studied this extensively. Decision-making is a finite resource. Every meaningful choice you make consumes mental energy. And once that energy begins depleting, the brain shifts into a more automatic mode. Shortcuts, habits, default behaviors. This phenomenon is known as decision fatigue. And in modern financial life, it quietly shapes outcomes in ways most people never realize, because every financial obligation you add to your life creates recurring decisions. A mortgage requires constant financial monitoring. Car payments require income stability. Subscription services create small but persistent spending decisions. Insurance plans, credit accounts, lifestyle commitments. Each one appears manageable, individually, but collectively. They create a web of continuous financial attention. Attention is one of the most limited resources in human cognition. When financial complexity increases, decision fatigue begins accumulating. At first, it feels like mild stress. You monitor accounts more frequently. You track expenses more carefully. But over time, something subtle begins happening. Your brain starts seeking simplicity. Not strategic simplicity, psychological simplicity. The fastest way to simplify. Financial life is not necessarily the smartest. It is the most immediate. Which often means spending decisions become reactive instead of strategic. Small indulgences appear harmless. Impulse purchases feel justified. After stressful days, convenient spending increases. Gradually, financial discipline begins weakening, not because someone lacks intelligence or awareness, but because their cognitive resources are exhausted. This is where the system quietly wins. Modern consumer economies are built around frictionless spending, one-click purchases, instant digital payments, automatic subscriptions. The fewer decisions required to spend money, the easier it becomes for decision fatigue to push behavior toward consumption. Meanwhile, building wealth requires the opposite: delayed gratification, intentional choices, long-term thinking, strategic patience. These behaviors demand cognitive energy, which means the more complex someone's financial life becomes, the harder it becomes to maintain them consistently. This is why high-income individuals with complicated lifestyles often struggle financially. Their financial structure consumes enormous cognitive bandwidth. They are constantly managing payments, obligations, expectations, and expenses, which leaves little mental space for long-term financial strategy. In contrast, Individuals who intentionally keep their financial structures simple often maintain far greater control over their capital. Fewer obligations, lower fixed expenses, you have more flexibility. This simplicity reduces decision fatigue, which preserves cognitive energy for strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is what allows someone to protect and grow their capital base. This is another reason why the $50,000 threshold represents a critical moment. Because at that point, a person faces a subtle but powerful choice. One path leads toward increasing complexity, higher lifestyle, more obligations, more financial maintenance. The other path leads toward strengthening capital infrastructure, protecting liquidity, maintaining flexibility, expanding optionality. Both paths can appear successful in the short term. But over time, their outcomes diverge dramatically. One path builds a life dependent on continuous income. The other builds a system where money begins working independently. This is the structural fork most people encounter without realizing it. They believe they are simply improving their quality of life. But in reality, they are choosing between two entirely different financial architectures. Architecture 1. Consumption-driven stability. Architecture 2. Capital-driven independence. The first feels comfortable immediately. The second often requires restraint and patience, which is why the majority of people unconsciously choose the first path. But those who choose the second path eventually gain access to something extraordinary: financial leverage, not the kind sold in flashy investment advertisements, but structural leverage, the ability to use capital to generate opportunities, optionality, and asymmetric outcomes. This is where wealth building truly begins. Not with income, not with saving, but with capital deployment. Just because once someone crosses the first capital threshold and protects it long enough, money begins to shift from passive storage into strategic force, and this is where the next stage of the system reveals itself. The strategic blueprint that turns modest capital into long-term wealth architecture. But the blueprint only works if the foundation has already been protected, and that foundation begins with the most fragile but powerful milestone in personal finance. Your first $50,000. Once someone crosses the $50,000 threshold and manages to protect it, a new phase begins. This phase is completely different from the survival stage. Before this point, the objective was simple: build insulation, protect against emergencies, escape financial fragility. Create a buffer large enough to prevent life from constantly resetting your progress. But once that buffer exists, the objective changes. Now, the goal is no longer survival. The goal becomes structural positioning. Because capital sitting idle is stable. But capital organized into a strategic structure becomes powerful. This is where the difference between saving money and building wealth becomes visible. Saving preserves resources. Wealth architecture multiplies them. And the first rule of wealth architecture is simple, but often misunderstood. Your capital must perform different jobs simultaneously. Most people treat money as a single pool. All income enters, all expenses leave. Savings accumulate in one place. Investments exist somewhere else. But this structure lacks intentional design. A strategic capital system organizes money into layers, each serving a specific function. And the moment someone crosses the $50,000 threshold, those layers can begin forming. The first layer is liquidity protection. This is the capital that protects your financial stability. Emergency funds. Cash reserves. Short-term buffers. This layer does not exist to produce returns. Its purpose is defensive stability. Because as long as liquidity protection exists, unexpected events cannot destroy your financial system. Without this layer, every investment decision carries emotional pressure. With it, your capital structure becomes resilient. Many financial strategists recommend maintaining several months of expenses in this layer. Not because cash produces growth, but because it protects the rest of the system from disruption. Once liquidity protection exists, the second layer begins forming. Growth capital. This is the portion of money allocated toward long-term compounding. Index funds, diversified equities, long-term investment vehicles. The purpose of this layer is simple. Allow mathematics to operate. Growth capital benefits from time, consistency, and reinvestment. It is not designed for short-term access, yet it is designed to remain untouched, long enough for compounding velocity to mature. This is where the mathematics we discussed earlier begin operating quietly in the background. But the blueprint does not stop there, because long-term investing alone does not create significant financial acceleration. It creates stability. Acceleration requires a third layer: opportunity capital. Opportunity capital is different from growth capital. Growth capital is passive. Yet opportunity capital is strategic. It exists to capture asymmetric opportunities when they appear: business ventures, strategic investments, skill expansion, entrepreneurial projects, market dislocations. These opportunities rarely appear on predictable schedules, which is why opportunity capital must already exist before the opportunity arrives. If someone must scramble to gather money, when an opportunity appears, the window is often already closing. But if capital has been intentionally reserved for these moments, decisions can be made quickly and strategically. This is where the first $50,000 begins changing someone's financial reality. Because before this point, most people cannot separate their money into strategic layers. Everything is required for survival. But once insulation exists, the architecture begins forming: liquidity protection, growth capital, opportunity capital. Each performing a different function, each reinforcing the others. This layered structure creates something incredibly powerful: financial flexibility. Flexibility changes how someone interacts with the world. Instead of reacting to circumstances, they begin positioning themselves within them. Instead of fearing uncertainty, they begin recognizing opportunity within it. Because when capital is structured correctly, uncertainty becomes a resource instead of a threat. This is why individuals with even modest capital bases often begin seeing opportunities that others miss. It is not superior intelligence, it is structural freedom. Their financial architecture allows them to think differently, to act differently, to wait longer, to move faster when necessary. But the blueprint contains one more crucial component, a component that determines whether someone's capital system grows slowly or begins accelerating. Skill stacking, because capital alone rarely produces extraordinary outcomes. Capital combined with high-value skills creates exponential potential. When someone builds capital while simultaneously increasing their strategic skills, something remarkable happens. Their ability to generate income improves. Their ability to identify opportunities improves. Their ability to deploy capital intelligently improves, which means every layer of the system begins reinforcing the others. Income strengthens capital. Capital creates opportunity. Opportunity strengthens income. And slowly, quietly, the financial system begins, transforming from a fragile structure into a self-reinforcing machine. But this blueprint only works under one condition. The capital threshold must remain protected long enough for the architecture to stabilize. And that is where the next stage becomes critical. Because once the foundation exists, the next objective is not simply growth. It is acceleration. And acceleration requires a very specific system. A system most people never build, because it requires thinking about money in an entirely different way. Not as a resource, but as an engine. Once the three layers of capital begin forming, liquidity protection, growth capital, and opportunity capital, the financial system starts stabilizing. But stability alone does not create meaningful wealth. Stability simply protects progress. Acceleration requires structure, and this is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume that investing consistently will eventually solve everything. But investing alone, even when done correctly, often produces gradual wealth. Gradual wealth is powerful over long periods. Yet, the individuals who accelerate financially tend to build something more deliberate. They build capital architecture designed for asymmetry, where asymmetry means placing resources where the potential upside dramatically outweighs the downside. This does not mean reckless risk. It means carefully positioning capital where a small percentage of successful outcomes can dramatically shift financial trajectory. To understand this, consider how most people allocate their financial energy. They focus almost entirely on income. Working harder, seeking promotions, negotiating salaries. This approach can improve financial stability, but it remains tied to time. 1 hour of work produces 1 unit of income. Even highly paid professionals remain within this structure. Their earnings may be impressive, but their financial growth remains limited by labor capacity. Capital architecture breaks this limitation. It allows financial growth to occur in parallel with labor rather than depending entirely on it. This is why the blueprint we discussed earlier includes opportunity capital. Opportunity capital exists specifically to create asymmetric outcomes, but asymmetric opportunities require preparation because they rarely appear in predictable forms. Sometimes they appear as business ideas, sometimes as undervalued investments, sometimes as skill expansions that dramatically increase income potential, sometimes as strategic partnerships. The common feature is uncertainty. Most people avoid these opportunities because they appear risky, but risk behaves differently. When someone has already built structural capital layers, liquidity protection ensures personal stability. Growth capital continues, compounding regardless of short-term decisions. Opportunity capital becomes the portion of resources intentionally exposed to potential high-reward outcomes. This separation is critical because it allows someone to pursue asymmetric opportunities without jeopardizing their entire financial system. Without this separation, risk becomes terrifying. With it, risk becomes manageable experimentation. This is how many financially successful individuals approach wealth creation. They protect the foundation. Then they deploy smaller portions of capital toward opportunities that have the potential to multiply their resources. Most attempts may produce modest results. Some may fail entirely. But occasionally, one opportunity generates disproportionate returns. A successful business venture, a strategic investment, is a skill expansion that dramatically increases earning potential. These events can shift financial trajectory far more dramatically than incremental saving alone. But this strategy only works if someone understands an important principle. The purpose of opportunity capital is not certainty. It is exposure. Exposure to environments where asymmetric outcomes can occur. This might include entrepreneurship, equity ownership, specialized skills that command premium value, investments in industries experiencing structural growth. The exact path varies for each individual, but the underlying strategy remains consistent. Protect the core, compound the base, expose a controlled portion of capital to asymmetric opportunities. Over time, this approach creates something powerful: a financial system capable of multiple growth channels operating simultaneously. Labor income continues flowing. Growth capital compounds quietly. Opportunity capital occasionally produces acceleration events. Together, these channels form the blueprint for long-term wealth architecture. But this blueprint requires patience, because asymmetry does not appear on a predictable timeline. Opportunities arrive irregularly, which means capital must remain available long enough for them to appear. This is another reason why protecting the first $50,000 threshold matters so much. It is the first stage where capital can begin supporting this architecture. Below that level, resources are too constrained. Every dollar remains tied to survival. Above it, strategic deployment becomes possible. And once someone begins operating within this blueprint, a surprising shift occurs. Their relationship with money changes. Instead of asking, "How much can I earn this year?" they begin asking, "How can my capital system expand its reach?" Instead of focusing solely on work, they begin focusing on position. Position determines opportunity. Opportunity determines asymmetry. And asymmetry determines acceleration. But acceleration requires another critical component, one that most people overlook entirely. Because building capital layers and strategic opportunity exposure is only half of the system. The other half is how income itself is structured. And once someone understands this final mechanism, they begin constructing something far more powerful than a financial plan. They begin building a financial engine, one designed to generate momentum, instead of relying on effort alone. Up to this point, the system we have built is stable. Liquidity protection shields you from disruption. Growth capital compounds quietly in the background. Opportunity capital positions you for asymmetric outcomes. This structure is powerful, but it still operates primarily in one dimension. No income flows in, capital accumulates, investments compound, the system grows. But the individuals who accelerate financially, sometimes far faster than expected, introduce something different. They build a dual engine. Two independent forces pushing wealth forward. At the same time, the first engine is familiar. Income. The second engine is far more powerful. Assets. Income is produced by effort. Assets produce income without requiring additional time. And once these two engines begin operating simultaneously, something extraordinary happens. Financial momentum begins forming. Most people operate with only one engine. They work, they earn, they save a portion, they invest slowly. This system can produce stability over long periods, but it rarely produces acceleration. Because growth remains dependent on the next paycheck, which means time remains the limiting factor. The dual engine system removes that limitation. It allows financial growth to occur in parallel with labor. While you work, assets work. While you sleep, assets continue generating value. This is why the moment someone crosses the $50,000 threshold and begins constructing capital layers, the next objective becomes clear. Acquire assets, not consumption assets, not depreciating purchases, not lifestyle upgrades. Disguised as investments, real assets, assets that generate cash flow, assets that appreciate over time, assets that produce economic output. These assets come in many forms: equity ownership, business interests, dividend-producing investments, intellectual property, specialized digital assets, real estate in specific circumstances. The specific asset class matters less than the underlying principle. The asset must produce value, independent of your labor. Because once asset income begins forming, the structure of financial growth changes dramatically. Is imagine someone earning $80,000 per year from their career. If they save diligently and invest consistently, their wealth will grow gradually. But their growth remains tied to their ability to continue working. Now imagine the same individual gradually building assets that produce $5,000 annually, then $10,000, then $20,000. At first, these numbers seem modest compared to their salary. But something subtle begins happening. The assets start reinforcing the capital base. Instead of relying entirely on labor income for investment contributions, asset income begins contributing as well. The system starts feeding itself. Labor income fuels capital. Capital produces assets. Assets generate additional income. That income feeds back into capital again. This is the beginning of financial acceleration. But here is where many people make a dangerous mistake. They attempt to accelerate too early. They begin chasing high-risk investments or speculative opportunities. Before the capital base is strong enough to absorb potential losses, this often destroys the system. Before it stabilizes, acceleration must be built gradually. The foundation must remain intact. Liquidity protection must remain untouched. Growth capital must continue compounding. Opportunity capital must remain disciplined. Only then should asset acquisition begin expanding. This measured approach may appear slow, but it preserves the structural integrity of the financial system. And once that integrity exists, acceleration becomes sustainable. But acceleration introduces a new challenge: leverage. Leverage is one of the most misunderstood forces in finance. Used correctly, leverage can amplify opportunity. Used carelessly, it can destroy years of progress. Almost instantly, many people associate leverage with borrowing money. But leverage exists in many forms: financial leverage, skill leverage, network leverage, technology leverage. Each of these allows individuals to multiply the impact of their time and capital. But the most important distinction is between controlled leverage and abusive leverage. Controlled leverage expands opportunities while maintaining structural safety. Abusive leverage exposes the entire financial system to catastrophic failure, and the difference between the two often determines whether someone's financial trajectory accelerates or collapses. Which means as the dual-engine system begins forming, income and assets working together, another layer of strategic thinking becomes essential. Understanding when to move and when to wait. Because acceleration is not simply about working harder or investing more aggressively. It is about recognizing timing windows. Moments when positioning, preparation, and opportunity align. And those moments rarely announce themselves in advance. Acceleration in finance rarely happens in a straight line. Most people imagine wealth growth as a steady climb. Income increases gradually. Investments grow slowly. Assets accumulate over time. And eventually, the results become meaningful. This image feels comfortable, predictable, safe. But when you examine the financial trajectories of individuals who experience true acceleration, the pattern looks very different. Their progress often appears uneven, long periods of steady preparation, followed by sudden jumps in financial position, then another plateau, then another jump. This pattern occurs because financial systems do not operate on constant momentum. They operate on timing windows. A timing window is a moment when preparation and opportunity intersect. And when that intersection occurs, small decisions can produce disproportionately large outcomes. But timing windows only benefit those who are already positioned. Consider two individuals observing the same opportunity. Perhaps a new industry beginning to grow, a technological shift, creating new markets, a business model that suddenly becomes scalable. Both individuals may recognize the potential, but only one of them has the capital, skills, and flexibility to act immediately. The other may need months or years to prepare. By then, the window may already be closing. This is why financial acceleration often appears mysterious from the outside. Observers see someone succeed. Suddenly, they assume luck. But what they do not see is the years of positioning that allowed the person to act at the exact moment opportunity appeared. And positioning requires three elements: working together, capital, skills, optionality. Capital provides the resources required to act. Skills provide the ability to evaluate opportunities intelligently. Optionality provides the freedom to move without destabilizing the rest of your life. Without these three elements, opportunities often remain theoretical. You may recognize them, but you cannot capture them. This is why the early stages of financial development focus so heavily on building capital layers: liquidity protection, growth capital, opportunity capital. These layers create the flexibility required to move when timing windows appear. But flexibility alone is not enough, or acceleration also depends on recognizing the difference between leverage control and leverage abuse. Leverage control uses external resources to amplify opportunity while protecting the core system. Leverage abuse exposes the entire financial structure to unnecessary risk. For example, someone might use moderate leverage to acquire a productive asset. If the asset performs as expected, returns increase. If the asset underperforms, the core capital structure remains protected. But abusive leverage removes this protection, borrowing aggressively to pursue speculative opportunities, concentrating large portions of capital into a single uncertain outcome, using debt to finance lifestyle rather than productive assets. These behaviors often appear attractive during periods of economic optimism, but they transform the financial system from resilient to fragile. And fragility destroys acceleration. Because once a system becomes fragile, every decision begins carrying existential risk. Instead of focusing on opportunity, individuals become preoccupied with protecting themselves from collapse. This is why controlled acceleration requires discipline. The core capital layers must remain intact. Growth capital must continue compounding. Liquidity protection must remain untouched. Opportunity capital must be deployed selectively. When this discipline is maintained, acceleration can occur without jeopardizing the foundation. And over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The financial system becomes increasingly self-sustaining. Labor income becomes only one component of growth. Assets produce additional income. Investments compound independently. Opportunities occasionally produce asymmetric outcomes. At a certain point, the system begins producing more financial momentum than labor alone ever could. And that is when the true shift begins. Because once someone reaches this stage, the most important transformation is no longer financial. It is psychological. The way they think about time changes. The way they evaluate opportunities changes. Their relationship with consumption changes. They stop thinking in months. They start thinking in decades. And that shift, in perspective, marks the beginning of something far more powerful than wealth. Identity evolution. At a certain point, in the financial journey, something unexpected happens. The most important changes are no longer external. Income may continue increasing. Assets may continue growing. Opportunities may continue appearing. But those outcomes are no longer the most significant transformation. The most important shift becomes internal. Because building capital long enough begins to change how someone thinks about the world itself. Early in the journey, money feels urgent. Every dollar carries emotional weight. Every financial decision feels consequential. Short-term needs dominate attention. Bills, obligations, immediate security. This stage compresses time. The future feels distant. The next month feels critical. This psychological state is not a flaw. It is a natural response to financial instability. When resources are limited, the brain prioritizes survival. But as capital layers stabilize, once liquidity protection exists, once growth capital begins compounding, or once assets begin contributing income, something subtle begins happening. Urgency fades, not entirely, but enough to create mental space, and mental space changes behavior. Because once survival pressure decreases, the brain begins shifting from reactive thinking to strategic thinking. This is where identity evolution begins. People who reach this stage often notice that their relationship with consumption begins changing. Not through forced discipline, through perspective. With earlier in life, spending money on comfort or visible upgrades may have felt deeply satisfying. It represented progress, validation, evidence that effort was producing results. But once someone understands capital systems, once they have watched money compound quietly for years, the psychology begins shifting. Consumption starts feeling temporary, while capital begins feeling structural. A luxury purchase might provide excitement for weeks, perhaps months, but watching a capital base expand year after year produces something different, a sense of permanence, a sense of control over the future. This shift does not eliminate enjoyment or lifestyle improvements, but it changes the emotional hierarchy. Short-term pleasure loses its dominance. Long-term positioning becomes more rewarding. This is why individuals who build meaningful capital often appear surprisingly restrained compared to their income levels, not because they lack the ability to spend, but because they have experienced the psychological reward of watching systems compound over time. And once that experience occurs, it becomes difficult to trade structural growth for temporary consumption. This identity shift also changes how someone evaluates opportunities. Earlier in life, opportunities may appear primarily through the lens of income. So how much will this pay? Will this improve my lifestyle? But once capital systems are operating, the evaluation becomes more strategic. Does this expand my positioning? Does this strengthen my capital system? Does this improve my optionality 5 or 10 years from now? These questions operate on a completely different time horizon. Instead of chasing immediate financial rewards, individuals begin optimizing for future leverage. This is why long-term thinkers often appear patient. They are not avoiding opportunity. They are evaluating it across longer cycles. And longer cycles reveal patterns that short-term thinking often misses. Because the most powerful outcomes in finance rarely appear quickly. They emerge slowly, gradually, over years of positioning. Which means someone who thinks in months may constantly feel pressure to act, but someone who thinks in decades understands that many opportunities improve simply through waiting. This ability to wait becomes one of the most valuable strategic advantages in finance. Patience allows compounding to mature. Patience allows opportunities to clarify themselves. Patience prevents impulsive decisions that could destabilize the system. But patience requires something most people never develop: strategic detachment. Detachment from constant comparison, to detachment from status pressure. Detachment from the cultural expectation that financial success must be visible. Because once someone begins building capital quietly, they realize something surprising. Real wealth is often invisible. It exists in investment accounts, in ownership stakes, in assets quietly producing value, not in visible consumption. This realization changes identity even further. Instead of measuring success by lifestyle signals, individuals begin measuring it by system strength, how resilient their capital structure is, how many income streams their system produces, how much optionality their resources provide. And once identity begins shifting toward system thinking, something powerful happens. Financial discipline stops feeling like sacrifice. It begins feeling like alignment. But this transformation does not occur automatically, because identity evolution requires confronting one of the most difficult psychological challenges in modern society: delayed gratification. And delayed gratification is far more complex than simple self-control. It requires rewiring how someone perceives time itself. Delayed gratification is often misunderstood. People imagine it as a simple trade-off: give up something today, receive something larger tomorrow. But the psychological reality is far more complex, because the human brain does not naturally experience time in equal intervals. The present feels vivid. The future feels abstract. This imbalance creates a powerful bias. Immediate rewards feel emotionally stronger than distant ones, even when the distant reward is objectively larger. This is why spending money on immediate comfort often feels more satisfying than investing it for a future outcome. The brain perceives the present with full clarity, but it perceives the future through imagination. And imagination rarely carries the same emotional intensity as reality. Which means long-term financial thinking requires something unusual: the ability to treat the future as if it were psychologically real. Individuals who build meaningful wealth often develop this ability gradually, not because they force themselves to imagine distant rewards, but because they begin experiencing small versions of the future repeatedly. Each year they see their investments grow. Each year they see capital producing additional capital. Each year the financial system becomes slightly more stable. These small confirmations slowly reshape perception. The future stops feeling hypothetical. It starts feeling predictable. And once the future feels predictable, delayed gratification becomes easier. Because waiting no longer feels like sacrifice. It feels like strategy. And this shift also changes how someone interprets financial temptation. Earlier in life, a luxury purchase might feel like an achievement, evidence that effort is producing rewards. But once someone sees capital compounding, year after year, the evaluation changes. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" they begin asking, "What does this cost in future positioning?" A $10,000 purchase no longer represents just $10,000. It represents decades of potential compounding that money could have produced. If that $10,000 were invested and compounded at a modest rate over 25 years, it might grow to $60,000 or more. Over 30 years, it could exceed $100,000. This perspective does not eliminate consumption entirely, but it forces every major decision to compete with its future alternative. And once someone internalizes this mental framework, their identity shifts again. They stop seeing money as a resource to spend. They begin seeing it as a system to allocate. Allocation requires a different mindset. Spending focuses on immediate satisfaction. Allocation focuses on long-term system design. Where should this capital strengthen the structure? Where will it produce the most leverage? Where will it increase optionality? These questions transform financial behavior from reactive to strategic. But perhaps the most profound identity shift occurs in how someone perceives time itself. Most people think about financial progress in short intervals, monthly income, quarterly goals, annual milestones. These intervals feel natural because they match how employment structures operate. But wealth rarely grows meaningfully within those time frames. Wealth grows through decade cycles. 10 years of consistent investment can transform modest capital into significant resources. What 20 years can produce outcomes that feel almost disproportionate to the original effort. 30 years can create financial independence for individuals who started with very little. Once someone truly understands this, their entire decision-making framework changes. They stop asking whether a financial decision will produce results this year. They begin asking whether it strengthens their system. 10 or 20 years from now. This perspective dramatically reduces impulsive behavior when short-term fluctuations become less emotionally significant. Market volatility becomes less intimidating. Temporary setbacks feel manageable within a larger timeline. This is why individuals who build meaningful wealth often appear unusually calm during financial uncertainty. They are not ignoring risk. They are evaluating it across a much longer horizon. And when someone thinks in decades, most short-term noise becomes irrelevant. But this identity transformation leads to an even deeper realization. A realization that changes how wealth itself is defined. Because once someone has spent years building capital systems, something surprising happens. They begin questioning whether wealth was ever really about money at all. At the beginning of the financial journey, wealth appears simple. More money, more comfort, more freedom to buy what you want. This definition is easy to understand, and it is reinforced constantly by modern culture. Luxury cars, large homes, expensive travel. Visible signals that suggest someone has made it. But individuals who spend enough time building real capital systems eventually reach a moment where this definition begins to feel incomplete. Not because those things are inherently wrong, but because they begin to recognize something deeper. Consumption does not create wealth, it displays it. And display is very different from structure. Yes, the person driving. An expensive car may possess tremendous wealth, or they may simply possess tremendous debt. From the outside, the signal looks identical, but internally, the structures are completely different. One person owns assets generating income. The other owes obligations that require constant income. This distinction becomes increasingly obvious as someone spends years observing financial behavior. They begin noticing a pattern. Some people appear extremely successful but remain financially fragile. Others appear relatively ordinary but quietly control enormous capital systems. This realization slowly shifts the definition of wealth. Wealth stops being measured by visible lifestyle. It begins being measured by structural freedom. Structural freedom means something very specific. The ability to make decisions without immediate financial pressure. The ability to walk away from situations that no longer align with your priorities. The ability to take time when necessary. To wait for better opportunities. To think clearly, without urgency distorting your judgment. These freedoms rarely come from consumption. They come from capital systems that produce stability over long periods. This is why many individuals who build meaningful wealth eventually simplify parts of their lives, not because they lack the ability to consume, but because they understand that excessive complexity weakens structural freedom. Every luxury commitment adds maintenance. Every upgrade adds financial obligation. Every visible signal requires energy to sustain. Over time, these commitments begin eroding the very freedom wealth was supposed to create, which leads to a subtle but profound shift. Instead of asking, "What can I buy?" people begin asking, "What can I remove?" Remove unnecessary obligations. Remove financial complexity. Remove pressures that force unwanted decisions. This process is sometimes described as financial decluttering, and it has a powerful effect on long-term wealth because simplicity strengthens capital systems. Lower fixed expenses. Create greater flexibility. Greater flexibility increases optionality. Optionality increases the ability to recognize and act on opportunities. This feedback loop reinforces the financial architecture we discussed earlier, but redefining wealth goes even deeper than structural freedom. Because once financial pressure decreases, people begin examining something they previously had. Little time to consider how they want to spend their time. Time is the one resource that cannot be expanded. Everyone receives the same daily allocation, which means once financial survival pressure disappears, the question becomes unavoidable. What should that time be used for? Many individuals who build wealth discover something surprising. After basic comfort and security are achieved, additional consumption produces diminishing emotional returns. A slightly larger home does not transform daily life. A slightly more expensive car does not meaningfully increase happiness. But time allocated toward meaningful work, relationships, creativity, learning, produces far deeper satisfaction. This realization leads to another shift. In the definition of wealth, wealth becomes less about owning things and more about controlling time. The ability to choose how your days are structured, the ability to pursue projects that matter to you, the ability to disengage from environments that drain energy. These forms of freedom are rarely discussed in financial conversations, but they represent the true long-term value of building capital systems. Because once capital begins generating income independently, labor becomes optional rather than mandatory. Work can still exist, but it becomes chosen rather than required. And that shift changes the psychology of life itself. But redefining wealth requires confronting one final illusion, an illusion deeply embedded in modern culture: the belief that power comes from visible success, when in reality, the greatest form of power often remains invisible. One of the most persistent illusions in modern financial culture is the belief that wealth must be visible to be real. We are surrounded by signals that reinforce this idea: luxury brands, expensive neighborhoods, extravagant experiences. Broadcast across social media, these signals create a powerful narrative. If someone truly possesses wealth, the world should be able to see it. But when you study the behavior of individuals who have quietly built significant capital over decades, a different pattern emerges. Much of their wealth is invisible. It exists in systems rather than signals, was equity positions in companies, investment portfolios, quietly compounding over long time horizons, assets producing income without drawing attention, ownership stakes that generate value while remaining largely unseen. This form of wealth rarely produces dramatic visual indicators, but it produces something far more valuable: control over financial pressure. Because visible success often comes with visible obligations. Large homes require large maintenance. Luxury vehicles depreciate rapidly. Complex lifestyles demand constant financial upkeep. Invisible wealth, by contrast, strengthens flexibility. It allows individuals to make decisions without the need to sustain expensive signals, which creates a form of power that many people never recognize: the power of independence from perception. When someone no longer feels pressure to prove success through visible consumption, they gain the ability to structure their lives entirely around long-term priorities. They can choose simpler environments, simpler routines, simpler financial systems, and simplicity, over time, strengthens capital growth. Because fewer obligations mean fewer drains on resources. This is why many individuals who build lasting wealth adopt surprisingly understated lifestyles, not because they lack ambition, but because they understand something that is rarely discussed openly: the visible success often requires constant financial maintenance. Invisible wealth quietly compounds, and over decades, the difference between those two approaches becomes enormous. But the deeper transformation occurs when someone realizes that wealth is not a destination. It is a system that continuously converts time, capital, and opportunity into greater stability and optionality. Once this perspective develops, financial behavior changes permanently. What decisions are no longer evaluated based solely on short-term outcomes. They are evaluated based on how they affect the long-term architecture of the system. Does this decision strengthen my capital base? Does it increase flexibility? Does it expand future opportunity? If the answer is no, the decision loses its appeal, no matter how attractive it appears in the moment. This mindset removes much of the emotional volatility surrounding money, because financial decisions become structural rather than reactive. The focus shifts from chasing outcomes to strengthening systems, and systems, when built carefully, produce outcomes automatically. But this realization leads to the final and perhaps most important question. If wealth is ultimately about building systems that create freedom, optionality, and time, what happens next? What happens? Once someone has crossed the threshold, protected their capital base, built compounding systems, developed strategic patience, and redefined wealth beyond consumption? At that point, the journey changes again. Because the final stage of financial evolution is not accumulation. It is ascension. Not in the sense of luxury or excess, but in the sense of moving beyond the financial anxieties that once dominated life. And once someone reaches that stage, they face a question that few people ever prepare for. What will you do with the freedom you have created? There is a moment that arrives quietly in the life of someone who has spent years building their financial system. It does not arrive with celebration. There is no announcement, no sudden transformation. But one day, something feels different. You look at your finances, and the familiar pressure is gone. Not completely, but enough that your decisions are no longer controlled by it. Bills no longer dictate your thinking. Unexpected expenses no longer feel threatening. Opportunities no longer feel out of reach. For the first time, your financial life feels stable enough to breathe. And that moment almost always traces back to a single turning point. Not $1 million. Not financial fame. Not some dramatic windfall. A far quieter milestone. The moment your capital system crossed roughly $50,000 and you chose not to destroy it. That decision changed everything. Because the first $50,000 is not just money. It is the foundation of financial gravity reversal. Before that threshold, money flows through your life like water. Income arrives. Expenses absorb it. Emergencies reset progress. Every step forward feels temporary. But once that threshold is protected, the direction begins to shift. Now capital begins, accumulating instead of disappearing. Time begins, amplifying your decisions instead of erasing them. And slowly, quietly, a system begins forming beneath the surface of your life. A system that no longer depends entirely on effort. A system that grows stronger. Every year, you leave it intact. Most people never experience this shift, not because it is impossible, but because the moment they approach it, the system surrounding them begins pulling them back. Lifestyle upgrades, status pressure, environmental expectations, the temptation to convert invisible capital into visible comfort. And each time that temptation wins, the threshold disappears again. The capital dissolves. The system resets. The cycle begins over. This is why crossing the $50,000 threshold is not just a financial achievement. It is a psychological victory. It means you resisted the forces designed to keep your resources circulating endlessly through consumption. You protected the foundation long enough for a system to form. And once that system forms, something extraordinary becomes possible. Time begins working in your favor. Years that once felt financially stagnant begin producing momentum. Compounding begins, reinforcing your capital base. Assets begin producing additional income. Opportunities become visible that once seemed inaccessible. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the system begins accelerating. But this transformation only happens if the threshold is treated with the respect it deserves, because $50,000 is fragile. It can disappear in a single decision, a lifestyle upgrade, a poorly timed risk, an emotional purchase disguised as reward. Which means protecting this milestone requires something most people never develop: long-term identity alignment. You must see yourself not as someone who earns money, but as someone who builds systems. Systems that compound. Systems that reinforce themselves. Systems that expand your freedom over decades. This identity shift changes everything. Because once you think like a system builder, every financial decision becomes structural. You begin asking different questions. Not, can I afford this? But, does this strengthen the system? Not, how much will I earn this year? But, where will my capital system be 10 years from now? Not, what lifestyle can I upgrade? But, what optionality can I create? And these questions slowly transform your entire financial life. Because wealth, in its most powerful form, is not measured in dollars. It is measured in freedom from financial pressure. Freedom to choose your work. Freedom to shape your time. Is freedom to wait for opportunities instead of chasing them. Freedom to build a life aligned with your priorities rather than your obligations. And that freedom begins with a surprisingly small foundation. The first capital threshold. The first moment. When money stops controlling your life and begins serving it. So the real question is not whether $50,000 is enough. The real question is whether you will treat that milestone as a destination or as the beginning of a completely different financial trajectory. Because once you understand the structure behind it, you realize something profound. The difference between financial struggle and financial independence often begins with a single decision. The decision to protect the first system you build. And once that system survives long enough to compound, everything changes.